Former FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried has been reaching out to potential witnesses via Signal, prosecutors say. This statement from the U.S. Attorney Damian Williams writes, "It has recently come to the government's attention that the defendant has been in direct communication with the current general counsel of FTX, who may be a witness at trial, witness 1, and who is represented by counsel."
Specifically on January 15th, 2023, the defendant contacted witness 1 over the encrypted messaging application Signal, as well as by email, and wrote in part, quote, "I would really love to reconnect and see if there's a way for us to have a constructive relationship, use each other as resources when possible, or at least vet things with each other." The defendant has also contacted other current and former FTX employees, according to Williams. So I think the question is, does this constitute witness tampering seems to be the big question, right? Is this somebody just trying to make his best case, or is this somebody like actually trying to influence potential witnesses, one of which would be obviously completely legal and fine, the other of which, would constitute something verboten. So I'm also very curious how they found out about this. My understanding of Signal is, it's encrypted, and I think it would be, good for the public to know whether Signal had supplied these, or, these messages, or if the witness 1 himself reached out to the judge.
That's my guess. My guess is the people he reached out to reported this to the prosecutors. So the prosecutors are portraying this as witness tampering. It remains to be seen, I guess, whether that is what it is counted as. Sam Bankman-Fried, so in these messages, he says, let's vet things by each other first. That definitely sounds witness tampering-y. I guess his defense, and you could actually end up believing this because he has seemed in all his interviews so naive about his potential criminality here, right? He's willfully talking to people, including the press, all the time. He's constantly suggesting and suggested in that Substack post he wrote that like the situation could still be salvaged if everyone would just do what he says. So I actually could imagine him, like I'm not being naive about this, I could imagine him sincerely contacting these people and thinking like, oh, the situation can still be, the ship can still be righted. Like he claimed that in the Substack. If we just do X, Y, and Z, the fund will still have money in it and we can make people whole. So I can actually imagine him contacting people still involved with the bankrupt company and saying, let's still strategize and work through how to make this thing work, which is a totally crazy thing to think, but it seems to characterize his thinking when he talks about this and what he writes about this. So I would actually be willing to believe it's not necessarily, although it certainly could be, for the benefit of his own case, because he, frankly, is doing a lot of things that don't seem to be to the benefit of his case, but out of this very self-deluded notion that he could and should still be running FTX, and everything would be going fine if he was.
Right. There's sort of a thin line between, the presumption of innocence and the benefit of the doubt, right? One of which he deserves as an American, and one of which he really does not deserve. And I just think this story is so hard for average Americans to see and not feel like there's a different standard for the rich and the famous and people who hobnob with Democratic politicians and so forth and espouse, these leftist liberal views, because if they stole millions of dollars, they would be in prison, right? And meanwhile, this guy seems to be still believing that he's going to get away with it, still believing that there's a chance that, this isn't going to come home to roost. So again, benefit of the doubt, this person does not deserve. Presumption of innocence, he does.
He can believe that, but that's not what's going to happen. I agree with you, especially in the initial media coverage of him, that it was very favorable and very apologetic, and you still see that in some of the coverage. There but for the grace of God go I, or there but for my journalism degree, which doesn't qualify me to manage vast finances, but I could have participated in that scheme. You see a lot of that in the mainstream coverage, and I think clearly the donations he gave to many media companies, progressive media companies, had some kind of goodwill buying effect, even indirectly perhaps. But in terms of his actual situation, it looks to me like he is being prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and given his antics, I have I have faith that he is going to be held accountable for wrongdoing at this part. I'm not seeing evidence at this point that he's really being treated with kid gloves. I think they're going to go after him with everything they can possibly go after him on. I could be wrong about that, but I'm not seeing any evidence at this point that he wouldn't. Then you'd have to start believing, well, is he getting off because he's given so much money to Democrats and Republicans? I see why you might believe that. But people who said, oh, he's never going to be arrested because he knows too much, right? That he's too big to fail. Well, then he got arrested. So it looks to me like they're gonna bring him to justice.
Yeah, I think so as well. Although obviously people should be on the lookout for any kind of favoritism, that's definitely a totally legitimate line of argument, and people should be wary about that, and we should be calling that out. I think, I think it's especially interesting that I was talking to the author of the Bernie Madoff book that was recently turned into a Netflix documentary. And he was talking about how Bernie Madoff was, very aware of what he was doing, very much in control of this. The whole Ponzi scheme stemmed from his inability to be wrong and to lose. He was used to walking into the room, whatever he said went, he was always right, and he couldn't stand the idea that he would be wrong. And so he started to do the Ponzi scheme as a way of just any time he, made a wrong prediction or what have you, to cover that up, because it was stemmed from just this enormous ego. I don't get that vibe off Sam Bankman-Fried. I think that there is a possibility that he really thought that, in a few cycles he would be able to recover the money. That's definitely possible, but that just doesn't matter, right? I mean, if you committed a crime, you committed a crime, right? Again, presumption of innocence, but it just does not matter why he did it, where it stems from. When it comes to these financial crimes, the question is, did you steal from these people knowingly? And we'll see the evidence as it's presented, but it definitely seems like, that happened.
You're right about that comparison. It's always hard to know with the people who do, like the blood lady or anyone, these fraudulent people. Did you know what you were doing? Or Martin Shkreli, whoever it is. And with Madoff, you're right. It was clear that he knew what he was doing was criminal. SBF has a level of self-delusion. And I could be wrong. I'm not a shrink. I haven't interviewed him. I haven't diagnosed him. But in all of his communications, he really seems to be buying what he himself is selling, which is actually the whole problem with the business model. But
right, but I think that to me is, it stems from the privilege of his upbringing, right? It stems from having been raised in this lap of luxury and the fiction, I'm sorry, of the meritocracy, where people who are born into privilege and get an amazing education at these elite institutions are then convinced that it was they themselves, right? With the genius of their brains and the power of their own minds and everything that got them their privilege, when of course it isn't. It's a system that's set up such that the upper middle class can secure those futures for their children, but others can't. And I think that, that self-delusion, you can't be a working class person, a middle class person, and walk around with that level of self-delusion and just have every institution you encounter buffer it up and tell you what a genius you are, including the New York Times and, every major publication, right? Constantly reinforcing your self-delusions. You just don't get that level of, grandeur, delusions of grandeur, if you live, a normal life, right? You're constantly being called to account for your actions. Every misstep you make has huge consequences, often extremely unfair ones. So it's, it does rankle when people ask for sympathy for this person. It does rankle because that level of self-delusion is only possible when you come up with the kind of privilege he had.
And because of all the wealth destruction of the people that he deluded, of the people he tricked, who lost so much money. So we will continue to cover SBF and FTX as soon as there are new developments. And we always tell you that we have more rising after this. That's my exit phrase for most segments. But we really mean it, because starting today, we're going to be giving you even more content at 4 o'clock. We're going to roll out a video every hour. Catch us tomorrow as well. Brianna Dre Gray will be back at the desk. Batya, it has been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Robby. I'll be watching tomorrow.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere that podcasts can be consumed. And we're also available on Roku and other streaming services. See you back here tomorrow. Goodbye.